Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best, worst, and middest of comic books, graphic novels, and sometimes mangas. I'm your host, the soon-to-be-known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my reluctant co-host, it's Jamie.
I was kind of hoping you hadn't noticed my general reluctance to make a podcast with you every week.
I mean, it's been almost a year, or over a year. The message kind of seeps in after a while, you know?
I mean, people have been in marriages they've not wanted to be in for 20 years, Ryan.
Yeah, I've had enough time around reluctant people to know when I'm not wanted. You develop a skill after a while.
You'd think all the bars I put on my door would have been an indication, but every week you bring a claw hammer, you pull them out.
You cannot stop me getting in.
You turn up and you're like, Jamie, it's time to talk about Avatar.
With microphones and mic arms just under, like, in my bag. Like, let me in. We need to talk about comic books and sometimes mangas.
Ryan actually, for the audience, Ryan bribes me with Kinder cards every week just to get me through the door.
It used to be playing cards, Pokemon cards, but then you started getting them free from that shop. So then I was like, I have to up my game here. And
I've not seen my guy for a while. I'm hoping he's not been fired.
Your contact.
Yeah. My cheeky link.
Yeah, I know a guy. I can get you a Bulbasaur. It's the first one that came to mind. Number one of the first generation was the first one that came to mind.
Oh, which makes sense. You're doing it chronologically.
Yeah, obviously. I'll be going to do that bit. How many now? Like 800 or something?
Oh, it's well over 1,000.
Oh, God, it's too much. It's too many. That was, I think, one of my first closest instances of like midlife crisis, or like the beginnings of, was being a child and them releasing the second generation and me being like, I had that realization immediately, like, it's never going to stop. Like, if they can add more now, they're just going to keep doing it. It was like, I grew like mentally and spiritually, I grew like a decade in just a minute of finding out there's more Pokemon coming out.
We're not about to get a whole new bunch though. We just had Pokemon Day, didn't we?
I did know that, but sure.
Yeah, February.
Should we have done something Pokemon for Pokemon Day?
No, because Pokemon Day is always kind of a letdown. So Pokemon Day is the anniversary of Gen 1 coming out, I think either in Japan or the States. Like, that's when they do it. And they just they talk about what's coming in the next year. Oftentimes, main series games don't even get announced on Pokemon Day.
Right.
So what got announced this year was a new Legends game.
Yeah, I did see something about that, yeah.
So it's based in the Gen 6 world, I believe.
Right.
And it's going to be a Legends game based in a city. You're rebuilding a city. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm really skeptical.
Just to mention up top, we are finally doing Avatar: The Last Airbender. We said we were going to do it, and then we didn't do it, but now we are doing it. But maybe we won't do it. Maybe we'll change our mind halfway through.
So I watched the 2009 film, so I know all about the Na'vi now, so I'm ready.
Yep, that's all you need is that film that everyone hates, and it's a really bad representation, but has somehow made the live-action Netflix series seem better by comparison.
There's not an Avatar live-action series.
There is no live-action. There is no live-action Avatar film in Ba Sing Se. That's what I was trying to say.
No, the Avatar film from 2009, the one with the big blue people.
Yeah, I know. Oh, right, you're to James Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're
doing, yeah.
Right?
He's kind of blue. He's got a bit of blue, so it's close enough.
No, dude, that's all I've prepped.
That's the comic you read.
Yeah, I felt like there was one Avatar comic. I assumed that was what we were doing today.
I mean, we could just do Pocahontas, and that would kind of cover all bases at that point.
Yeah, there's
Pocahontas
also
and Smurfs. No,
there's another film. There's a film about this guy who likes cutting trees down, and then gets shrunk down to the size of one of the fairies. It's like an animated film from, I want to say, the 80s, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it's really good. It's like Fergus or Phineas something.
Are you sure it wasn't an acid trip?
I mean, I don't do drugs, Ryan.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, did you just experience an acid trip? I mean, in the 80s. It was going around before you were born, obviously.
Did I have an acid trip before I was born?
Potentially. I mean, you can't say you didn't, for sure. You don't remember what happened before then.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, I'm Googling it right now, and I'm Googling film about guy who cuts trees down and gets shrunk.
I'll cover, if I just talk about the correct Avatar, and then every once in a while you just pop in and say, Avatar, blue, and then that'll be enough to cover your side.
It's Fern Gully.
Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest.
It's from 1992, and it's really good. It's an animated film that's basically just Avatar, and it's better than Avatar.
So you're saying you did that, and then that's what you're bringing to the table today?
Yeah, so I watched Fern Gully and Avatar.
And James Cameron's Avatar by James Cameron. That's how he likes you to say it.
James Cameron's Avatar by James Cameron featuring James Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, he's not featuring in it, but, you know, his presence is felt obviously all the way through the film. Do you know, I haven't seen those Avatar films.
Dude, I went to see the first Avatar film in 2009.
And for anyone listening, it's like, when are they going to talk about Avatar? Technically, we are now. So
yeah,
it's
we
fine.
are. We're straight into it, man. I went to see it in 2009. And I mean, bear in mind, this is right at like the end of my time in college. For our American listeners, college is what we in the UK call the last 2 years of secondary education between 16 and 18.
It's changed since we did it. So
yeah, it's compulsory. Back when we were in school, Americans,
back in our day,
Americans, I legally could have left school at 15 and I left school at 15 and chose to go back and do 2 more years, but I was legally considered to have been educated at that point in my life.
There's a bit of a cheeky loophole there because you only could have left at 15 because your birthday was after the end of the school year.
Yeah, but I totally left school at 15.
For 90% of everyone else, it was 16.
And Americans are going to be going, what, you can leave school at fucking 16?
The Chris Rock put that best because he dropped out of high school like before he graduated. And he put it well. He said, there's no difference between dropping out just beforehand and dropping out when you're like 10. He's like, if anything, it's even better if you drop out at 10 because then you've had like 5 years work experience.
Yeah, totally. You are the thing that everyone wants at that point. You're a 16-year-old with 10 years experience. Also, just a side note, in Australia, you can leave school at a certain age legally without having finished school. So you can get to a certain point and they're like, you're allowed to leave school, but we're not going to let you sit your exams yet. So you can just leave school without having sat your exams. So you have no like qualifications, but they're totally cool with you doing that. And it's just a quirk of the way their school system works.
I feel like to comment on it at all would be to indulge some not great stereotypes about the Australian peoples, just purely out of comedic reflex. So I'm not going to do that out of respect to maybe our Australian listeners.
Yeah, we should be kind to our flip-flop wearing Australian listeners.
They call them thongs over there, I believe.
They do, which is why I didn't say that. It's why I didn't use the correct terminology, because I didn't want to have to explain for our American listeners
what a thong is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in America, a thong is that thing that disappears after they first put it on. I feel much safer taking the piss out of the American listeners than I do the Australian listeners.
Yeah, the American listeners should be used to. I mean, the American listeners know that we are Britishers, and so they
British without the T.
British bottle of water, bottle of water.
Do you know why there's no T in British?
Why?
Because we drank it.
Well, I mean, you could argue the Americans put it all in the river in Boston, but
potentially that as well.
It was the sea, wasn't it? It was the sea.
I don't know. I know it was a tea party and it was very falsely advertised. There was probably a lot of angry British people like, where's the tea?
Did you turn up hoping there would be some Earl Grey?
Yeah, back then I was there and I was like,
in the 1700s.
I was like, hey ho lads, what's going on here then?
I want to say the Boston Tea Party was in the 1600s, but
I think it was like around Civil War kind of time. So I'd say 1700s,
like late 1600s, early 1700s. So yeah, it could be either side of that whole debacle. Yeah. I should know this. I've seen Hamilton.
Yeah, but also this ain't a history podcast. I was between history and historian. So it just came as his story.
His story.
His story, more like her story.
Ryan also left school at 16.
if you couldn't tell. So yeah, Avatar Last Airbender. We are doing specifically the Lost Adventures comic book adaptation. And I say adaptation. It's weird. We're doing 2 adaptations in a row because last week we did Dune.
But this feels less of an adaptation and more like the Star Wars thing where they're just filling the blanks for us.
I'd say even closer, even further than that, because this is essentially done by the people who made the animated series. So so they did all this. They are Bryan Konietzko and Dante DiMartino. So they did the animation and then they were like, we'll just do the comic books as well. This is more of an anthology series that takes place. It's short stories that take place while the animated series was happening, like along that story.
And do you know what? When I read the very first one, we're all starting with the arting in a minute. But when I read the first one, I thought you'd given me like another Cash Cow Barbie series to read.
It feels that way initially.
Because the very first one is like 2 pages long and basically Anne gets covered in bees. And that's all that happens.
Yeah. But then that story is so good. By the way, before we get into that, I have to do the let's talk preamble about the comic. So, okay, let's go.
Okay, let's go.
So it's an anthology series and that first story is definitely representative of, at the core, this is still a kids TV show. This is a kids story, but it also happens to be one of the greatest television shows I think ever made. And that's not wholly just objective. That is measurable by a lot of metrics. If you go on any kind of top 10, top 100, top whatever TV shows, bloody Rotten Tomatoes has 100%, IMDb, it's in the top 10 of all time. Like,
people like it.
It's a great, I love it. I think it's one of the best TV shows I've ever seen for that reason.
I've been kind of dipping in and out of the TV show since we said we were going to do this. I'm about a season and a half in.
Yeah, that's my fault. And I would, because when I first brought this up, and I was like, hey, the Netflix show's coming out soon. Well, let's do, there's some comics. I was excited because the comics that we're not covering today, but we will do in the future, take place after the series ends. Yeah. So it continues the story, which, for a story, not only is it continuing a story people love, but it's literally the story that was made by the people who made the show.
Yeah.
So it's as close, it's canon. It's as close to canon as you could possibly get. I was excited for it, and I brought it to you. I was like, hey, let's do this because it's coming out with the Netflix show. And you were like, cool. And then I was talking about like, yeah, then like it ties in with this in the TV show, which is, and I kind of was like expecting like excitement from you.
Yeah.
And it was only when I wasn't getting it to the level I expected, I went, wait, have you seen the show? And you were like, no,
I was busy doing other things.
But I was like, I just had it in my head that you must have, it seemed to me you must have seen it because it's just one of those things of like, it's in that realm of like, it's not anime, it's anime style, it's Western made. But I thought it was within that realm that you would just
I'm a nerd. I probably would have gravitated towards it at some point.
Exactly, yeah.
And knowing my youthful predilection for martial arts, this is something that young Jamie would have really liked.
This is the most like fantasy martial arts, but like in a good way, like transferring of, because there's martial arts in it.
Yeah, totally. Like, looking at some of the fighting styles, they were definitely recognizable to me.
Yeah, and it reminded me a little bit of Demon Slayer. That had a little bit with like the moves of the sword and the lines and all that kind of stuff, which was a callback to an episode we did before. But yeah, I watched the animation just because I'd heard how good it was, and then I watched it and I was like, yeah, this is amazing. Like it's a show that does the basics really well.
Yeah.
It just gets across like character arcs and it makes every character likable, and the story never feels like it's meandering.
Some of them less so, but in a way that gives them a lot of room to grow. And I think that's probably the thing that a lot of adults have kind of found in it, is that actually there are these really great character arcs, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't do anyone too simply, but it just uses simple storytelling techniques. Like, I called you reluctant in the beginning because I was trying to find a descriptor close to Aang. And the thing about Aang is, he is, despite being this happy-go-lucky protagonist, he's also a very reluctant hero. And it gets across really well, especially for a kid's show, how he is a child who is expected to be the chosen one savior of a very adult world. Despite it being presented in a kid's show format, if you're an adult watching it, you see these undercurrents of like, that's some pretty adult like colonization and subjugating entire people, and
I mean,
like,
it's high politics and war, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And I think it does a really masterful job of presenting that in a kids show format, getting it in a way where kids understand the stakes and like what's happening, but then an adult, you get that additional context of like real life context where you're like, oh, this means like this must be happening behind the scenes, and that's
kind of what I wish the Pokemon anime was.
Yeah, I mean, to compare them is so different considering the times that they came out.
Well, when did this come out?
This only came out like mid 2000s. So,
right.
Yeah.
So this came out when we were like teenagers.
I should think so, yeah. And that's naturally why we didn't gravitate towards it when it first came out.
I think if this had been on Nickelodeon when I was a kid, it probably would have been the thing I based my entire personality around.
I mean, a lot of people did, I assume, but it makes sense because obviously it's one of those ones where it's like, oh, you're watching a TV show. It's like literally watch a few episodes and you'll see what I mean, like how good it is.
We had that very conversation.
Yes,
didn't
exactly.
we? Where I was like, oh, do I have to watch a Nickelodeon show?
Well, take us through a little bit of your experience of it, because I think you had that kind of slow arc of like...
Yeah, I did. And then right up front, there was... So you kind of, Aang gets discovered by two people from one of the water tribes. And it becomes very clear that one of them is this really misogynistic teenager who's kind of cutting about with his sister. And you find out that all of his male role models have left him to go to war. And, this is like a small it's a pre-agricultural society kind of based on the Inuits, I suppose.
The water tribe are like almost a bit nomadic, but they do still have bases and tribes and stuff rooted in places.
Yeah, informed by Inuit culture.
Yes.
And, you're kind of looking at these young people who are there being raised by the elders, not being raised by the generation that should be raising them, because that generation is all off waging war with these fire people that you hear about. And, there's this idea of like reincarnation. So there's this immortal spirit almost of the avatar that's now residing in a child. And it kind of sets up these factions. And it just, even in those first few episodes, I felt that it really set everything up quite neatly to an extent that I was like, oh, there's some depth here.
Yeah. And
there was some depth from the start. And I think sometimes there's this propensity for stuff like this to evolve into that slowly. And so, people will say, oh, the Clone Wars stuff, watch it, but the first few seasons are okay and then it gets good after that.
Yeah.
Because it picks up and it kind of accrues depth as they started writing it.
Clone Wars literally starts off strictly anthology, like just stories from Star Wars from in this time period of the Clone Wars. And then it literally slowly shifts like over seasons from random stories, like one of them's got Jar Jar in and he's got into a situation, and then it slowly goes, and then by the last season it's like it's a hard story that's been built up over seasons. This is the culmination of it. It's tense and there's relationships that are being destroyed and like really serious stuff, but it's that frog in a boiling pot, which we've clarified is bollocks. But it's a good metaphor. You slowly get into this really big story,
whereas this felt kind of quite epic from the start.
Yes. Slowly sowing the seeds of like a bigger story. Yeah,
totally. And so, and again, I've not been watching it super closely. I don't watch TV super closely. TV is very much a background thing for me. That's just the nature of it. If I want to really immerse myself in something, I'll read a book or play a video game.
Ooh, fancy. You said video games. That kind of ruins right. If you just left it at books, I'm like, oh, fancy Dan with your degree. But then you said video games. I was like, oh,
I actually went to school until I was 20, right?
They said video games. I was like, oh, I do that as well. Like,
yeah, I mean, video games are more immersive for me than TV. So TV is something that often happens in the background. So I watched a good chunk of this while I was like fixing a guitar for somebody.
Yeah,
like I was working on a guitar commission for somebody, and I had this on in the background, and I was just kind of, partly watching it, partly carving a saddle for someone. But again, I've enjoyed my time with it, and I think I would like it has become over the past week or so the thing that I have on.
Yeah,
like when I want some TV on, it's kind of become the thing that I have on.
And it's all on Netflix still, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all on Netflix. And it's pretty good. I definitely have some thoughts about the comic book, and I think there's certain elements of the comic book that really nicely round these characters out. There's definitely some stuff that happens towards the end of season 1 that I'm just so excited to get into with you.
Sure.
About like Arrested Development and stuff like that, because I think some of the ideas it kind of puts forward, they're really fascinating.
Well, do you want to talk about that now as separate from the comic, like the TV talk first?
Yeah. So there's the two waterbenders that Aang ends up traveling with, or the waterbender and her brother.
Yes.
What are their names?
Sokka and Katara.
So Sokka's the chap, isn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
So obviously, one of the points of controversy from the live action show that I've seen, from what little I've read about it, is that everyone's really upset that they've toned down his misogyny.
Yes, exactly.
And Netflix made the, I think, quite obvious choice. And if I was in the boardroom when these decisions were being made, I probably, as a knee-jerk reaction, would have suggested this to make him less misogynistic, because it makes him more likable as a central character. But I think that would be really missing a trick, because we watch him through his travels and his adventures with Aang and his sister and all of the really strong female characters we meet throughout, particularly when they go to, it's like they're a community of like martial artists or women.
Yeah, the I can't remember. I watched a recap video literally just to remind myself of the entire series.
They don't bend anything.
No,
but they do break
fighters.
Things. Yeah, they're fighters. And they dress him up in what is their uniform that they train in, and it's very femme clothing, and he kind of has to reconcile himself with the fact that there's all these women out there who are so much stronger than him. And then we get to the bit where they're in the Earthbenders domain.
Yep,
and
season 2.
Well, no, sorry, it's right at the end of season 1.
Right.
But they're with one of the waterbenders, And he says, "Oh, have you not done your icicle run yet?" And he's like, "Well, no, my dad wasn't there to do that with me when I turned 14.
The women were called the Kyoshi Warriors.
Yeah, so his time with the Kyoshi Warriors I thought was really fascinating, but there was this moment where they're with one of the waterbenders, and he talks about this rite of passage that they will do, where they will pilot a ship through these, like an ice desert in the sea.
Yeah.
And it's about leadership and resilience and strength, and it's really testing their mettle becoming an adult. And he says, well, I never got that because all of the men were away at war. Like, everyone was away at war when this would have happened for me. And so he gets to do it, and he does it, and it's a real growth moment for him, and he does really well. And I think one of the most fascinating bits is that he ends up piloting them towards a solid, like, wall of rock, and he makes the quick decision to get Aang to fill the sails and to get Sokka, Katara to make a big wave of water and bend the water to go over it. But it's like, you kind of get into this idea of arrested development, and the fact that part of the reason for me that he's so fixated on masculinity is because he has been forced to live in a world that is absent of it.
Yeah. It also does get across that is not an uncommon trait, like, across the land because of the time period of when it's in.
I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about time periods because it's fantasy. I mean, this is set in some version of China at some point in history, isn't it?
So what's fascinating is, if you only have seen if you've only seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, that TV show, you don't think about time period as much, but exactly as you say, because it's fantasy. The series after it, The Legend of Korra, which is something completely different that we do not have time to get into right now. But what I will say is, what's fascinating about it is that the time actually leaps forward, like, quite a bit, and the society does evolve quite a bit as well. And there's a larger conversation there, which once we get to a point where you've seen Legend of Korra, there's going to be some fascinating discussions there, just in the lore of the world, because society actually progresses because of the airbenders. So, like, magic causes further progression in, like, science and industry because of basic things the fire people being able to meld metal and make, like, metal stuff when no one else can, and then that extends to the earth people, and then, like, there's lightning which can be controlled, which obviously then makes electricity, there's a weird thing where, like, society progresses quite a bit, surprising degree. When you first start Legend of Korra, you go, hang on, am I watching the right show? And it's just because society's progressed so much in a short time. So there's a bigger conversation there, which time period it gets really interesting at that point.
That's really congruent with the way that societies actually grow up and change. Have you ever heard of a book called Guns, Germs and Steel?
I mean, obviously I have, but for the listeners, if you want to explain a little bit.
Guns, Germs and Steel is a historical, it's a piece of history. And it is an examination of the reason that people from Western Europe colonized the Americas, and it wasn't the other way around. And it really came down to resources. So obviously there were cities, and Native American people did have cities. That's a fact. It's a fact that's often forgotten. But in Europe, we had just many, many more animals that were easily domesticated. There weren't really any good candidates for domestication in the Americas. In Europe, there were.
We also had less predators, I'm guessing, like less bears and stuff like that.
Fewer, yes. But again, because we lived in more settled societies, we were able to hunt them down a bit better.
Yeah.
So there were bears in Scotland, there were wolves in England, there were wolves all over Europe, but we were just better capable of hunting them.
Right.
The real thing is that once we had livestock, it made us want to stay put more, which meant that we then developed these cities, which gave us a focal point for our industries to grow. And so that it meant that at the point in history where we sailed across to the Americas, we had these really, really well-focused established societies, and Native American people largely lived in nomadic societies. And that meant that we were able to make that journey. But it's also the reason that we had plagues to give them. And the plagues that we brought over from Europe were more instrumental in our domination of the Native Americans than anything else. And the reason we had plagues is because we had fucking animals that were domesticated.
Right.
Plagues always come from diseases that crossed over from animals to humans.
Yeah.
COVID.
Well, there's some discrepancy with that more recently.
Yeah, but that was the abiding theory at the time, because that's how it's always worked. Look at smallpox. Smallpox comes from cows.
Yeah.
all of the big diseases that we had.
Does smallpox come from cows, or was it the vaccine from cowpox that stopped smallpox?
Yeah, and cowpox is a different strain of smallpox.
Cowpox is like a weaker version, to the point where milkmaids would get cowpox, and it was just a thing. And then someone was like, how come the milkmaids aren't getting smallpox? And then that led to...
but smallpox also came from cows.
Yeah.
And so, influenza came from animals. That's why we have bird flu and swine flu. And so we went over there with all of these fucking gnarly diseases, and that's what actually really fucked the Native Americans over hard, because we brought these plagues over that had bred in our cities that were just like, London was fucking knee-deep in animal shit for years. And like open-air abattoirs with no refrigeration.
Nowadays, it's human shit, unfortunately.
Yeah, fucking A. And so you kind of look at that and you think about the resources that a society had and the way that that shapes history, and you go, well, fuck, this, that's exactly, I mean, what you've just told me is a really great representation of the way that history actually moves and societies actually form.
I think what's especially interesting is, again, this relationship between the in the world magic that's just still very prominent. And another interesting aspect of the Legend of Korra is there becomes somewhat of a societal division between benders and non-benders, and it becomes this thing of like,
I mean, that happens everywhere.
That is the term. We're gonna have to keep using it. But there becomes a thing of like, these people can wield magic and we can't, and that the first season is that kind of like division in society where people are not happy about that imbalance of power.
But magic is a really great allegory for technology. Do you know the famous Isaac Asimov quote?
I actually do. For this one, it was the modern ad-libbing, obviously, modern technology is magic.
Any technology which is sufficiently advanced should be indistinguishable from magic.
Did he also say, I am iRobot?
for any new listeners, Ryan has been taunting me about iRobot for about 6 months now.
It's only when you bring up Asimov and I'm like, oh, Will Smith's iRobot.
Asimov's come up a lot recently. I'm not even reading Asimov at the moment. I'm reading Tolkien at the moment, but...
It's interesting, Tolkien, because this is a similar like world building kind of aspect as well.
Yeah, and there are some correlations between Aang and the Hobbits. I've definitely noticed some correlation between them. And then the magic users like the benders and the elves and this kind of ancient magic that's been passed down. Again, it's fantasy, and there's so many fantasy tropes that are just Tolkienian.
Yeah, I think. Especially getting into more of like the character arcs and stuff, like the plot points, those are when the basic block world building really comes into its own, because then they start to actually like swerve and red herring and kind of like take in different directions and stuff, and that's when it becomes more than just a kid show. And I don't mean to use that derogatory, but I mean like that is when it becomes more than some of its parts, when it does these bold moves.
Yeah.
I was going to ask where you got to in the TV show.
Right at the end of season 1.
Okay, so big battle in the North Pole, is it?
Yeah, so they're in the North Pole now.
Did you not meet Toph? Toph?
I have read ahead. I accidentally watched some episodes from season 2 and met Toph.
Fair enough. So she's a great character and a great introduction.
And she's great in
2.
here as well.
Yes.
She's great in this comic.
I mean, you know me, I'm a big Daredevil fan.
Yes.
So I loved that inclusion of a character who is blind but uses her powers essentially to see.
Yeah.
But then what's great is, and I think they do a bit in these comics, is you get points where they'll be flying on Appa, and she becomes essentially fully blind again, because she needs to be touching the earth to have that power.
Yes.
I'll give away one very minor spoiler.
Okay.
But cool. It's one cool aspect is Toph not only is a great character, but she actually does essentially become like the world's greatest earthbender.
Oh,
because
really?
she does something that no one else has done before, where she connects to the earth to metal, which is only a thing because the Fire Nation are like melding metal and stuff.
Yeah.
She realizes that there's earth in the metal.
Is that why Toph has a sword that's made out of mineral? Toph has a sword at some point, doesn't she?
I think if it's after that point, then yeah.
Yeah.
But basically,
it's only because I've seen people do builds of that sword on YouTube.
But so basically she becomes a metal bender as well. And that's when you start getting into this, like, there becomes like extra levels of each tribe's bending powers. Mm-hmm. So for fire, that extends into lightning. So
Yeah.
lightning being an aspect of fire, that chemical reaction or whatever. So however it is.
We're getting into Marvel science now, right?
A little bit, yeah. But you can see what I mean, like this evolution of the powers and how that affects society and stuff as
I mean,
well.
like, right, fire is a plasma state that happens when you put ignition to a fuel, and lightning is an electromagnetic thing.
Yeah, but it's all made by Thor, so, at the end of the day.
No, Thor's not really associated with fire, is he?
Yeah, I guess not. But I mean, if you hit a hammer hard enough Thor can like explode planets or stuff. Or am I thinking of Superman? I don't know. So I'm not in my Marvel brain right now.
I think you're thinking about, what's his name?
Galactus?
Yeah.
He eats planets, so that's very different. Very, very different.
But no, I genuinely, I think the world building here is cool. I mean, it's Tolkienian.
Yes.
In its depth, and I think that's really fascinating for a kids show. I can't think of another children's TV show that hits that level of depth.
Exactly. And again, this is just so one of a kind. And I think to tie off some of the TV show talk, I think that is a big reason why adaptations are so difficult. Now,
yes.
M. Night Shyamalan's one is just renownedly one of the worst films of all time.
I mean, from what I can see of it, that was doomed from the start because they changed a lot of the character models and made everyone look a bit different.
They changed a lot of stuff.
And that alienates your core audience. And if you don't attract another audience with what you've done, the conversation becomes about what you've taken away. Yeah. And I must admit, I did see some of the character model for Aang in the film, and it was bad.
Yes. What's unfortunate is that kid is like a really accomplished martial artist.
Well, you'd need to be to play Aang, wouldn't you?
But that's what I mean. Like, they found the kind of perfect kid if you were going to make a live action film.
But they just costumed him badly.
And everything else around it sucked as well. But the point I'm getting at is to make an adaptation of something that when the source material is so renownedly great.
Yeah.
And it's not like adapting a book where it's such a different medium from live action anything. It's adapting something that was already like a TV show that people watched on the same devices and stuff, and you going, well, let's make a live action one and let's see if we can make it better. It's like, but the source is already one of the best TV shows of all time. It adapt something that was shit and try and make that better, or at least make it different enough. Like The Last of Us, good example. TV show is very different, still got the same core beats, but they took a lot of liberties to make it its own thing.
I mean, it also has Pedro Pascal in it, and who doesn't like Pedro Pascal?
Well, that seems to be the thing for any adaptation now, because he was just cast as Mr. Fantastic in the Fantastic Four. So, and I don't know how to feel about that. I think he's a bit too old for the role.
I don't know enough about the Fantastic Four to weigh in on this one.
Yes. But one thing that was good is they cast the guy from The Bear, Richie, as the Thing, which I said before was like perfect casting.
Yes.
He basically already is the Thing.
Has the Jeremy Allen White controversy gone away yet?
What controversy?
There was a whole thing about him like cheating on his wife or something, or like leaving his wife and being spotted with some person.
I have not heard about this. It's probably an area of film news or not even film news. It's like an area of like entertainment news that luckily does not cross my feed.
So I've liked Jeremy Allen White for a while because
Shameless.
Yeah. I was a huge fan of the original. Got into the American one about a year or two ago. Really enjoyed that as well. And so when I saw The Bear come up, I was like, oh my God, and it was amazing, wasn't it? It was just so good. But no, so Avatar.
So I think to excuse, we have talked longer around the subject without talking about the comic. The reason being is these comics, the ones we're doing right now, Lost Adventures, they are little anthology stories that take place kind of in and around the TV show, the plot. There's not as much to get into with this comic. But that's because then if we do Avatar in the future, and if you finish the TV show, then we can do the continuing stories, which will have more depth in the story.
Yeah, I'm not super interested in talking about actual story beats today. Like
there's a couple I think are worth it.
Yeah, no, there's some worthy moments. Starting with the arting, though.
I
really liked the artwork because it looked just like the TV show.
This was my point was going to be I don't have much to say about the artwork because it's so close. I have a few points though, still some good stuff.
No, I thought it looked good. I think it's interesting that you can see that it was a Western production going for a manga style.
Yeah.
But
I'd say anime style specifically because it went straight to animation.
And I think that's what's really interesting is that it doesn't look like a manga, but it doesn't look like a Western comic. It looks like a Western comic cribbing the anime style.
Yes.
Which is actually in and of itself, like, that's like 3 degrees of culture removed.
I was
isn't it?
about to say it's going around in a circle because it's going from manga as a concept to anime, and then Avatar: Last Airbender influenced by anime, and now this comic book adaptation of a anime influence, which anime itself was influenced by manga. So you're going it's a horseshoe. You're going all the way around, and you're coming back to not manga looking comic, but anime looking comic, which was itself inspired by manga.
Because 100%, if you printed this right to left, back to front in an inky paperback in grayscale, it would look like a manga.
Yeah, I literally, just as you said that, just imagined what an Avatar: Last Airbender manga would look like, and you could just seamlessly get a manga artist, and you could literally just do a manga adaptation in the format.
In the 3rd issue of the thing we were reading, there's whole stories that go into this really chibi. I don't know if you noticed them. Like, you know what I mean by chibi, don't you?
No idea. I know, but explain for the audience.
Chibi is an art style where you're kind of going really heavy into the manga thing. You know, when we were reading Slam Dunk?
Yeah.
And there were the bits you didn't like where it was all zoomed out and they used these chubby little round character models.
Yes.
That.
Right.
There's whole stories in this anthology that use that chibi art style throughout.
Yeah. And I think I didn't notice that as much because the actual character models are closer to that style in close-up.
Totally.
So there's less difference. Whereas Slam Dunk, you were going from like detailed, like well-drawn, detailed bodies, and then further away it was like
100%. I was only using that as a reference point to explain to you what chibi art meant, because when I struggled to articulate it because I know what it is when I see it. Like when Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl came out, the Diamond and Pearl Pokemon remakes that came out a couple of years ago,
right?
They had a really chibi art style,
right?
And everyone was like, "Oh, why are they doing this? Like, why have they made it look worse than the original?" And again, like I wasn't so much of a fan of the really chibi stuff, but in general, the art really kind of landed for me. Like, Aang is such an expressive character because he's so frenetic. So in the cartoon, he's always moving. He's very seldom idle. You know, even when it cuts to them getting up in the morning, he's always the first one up, and he's kind of doing stuff around Sokka and Katari, and you know things are happening. And even when he's on that what's that big bull thing called?
Appa.
When he's on Appa, he's kind of moving around, making stuff happen. And I think they did a really good job of translating that into still images. Like, he still feels very mobile. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to make more of the point closer to the action. I was going to say because otherwise everything else I feel was just a good translation of the cartoon to a comic book.
Yeah.
But where it really shines as a good adaptation was that they were able to get across these fighting moments and airbending fights and all those using still images. They were able to get across, like, here's them moving rock and here's them controlling water, and the still images of like the body shapes that people were taking while mid-bending. Like, all that was really good at just telling me, the reader, like, they are moving this direction, like they're throwing it against that person. Like, it was all really good stuff in that regard.
And I suppose as the comic goes on, we see more exuberant waterbending from Sokka because her powers are growing. From Katara. Because her powers are growing and she's becoming, you know, more just able as a waterbender.
Yeah, she's learning alongside Aang, which is it's then a good subplot of like their relationship as well.
Their relationship's lovely.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
It gets more kind of serious as it goes along.
Do they romanticize it?
It does somewhat, but I won't spoil it. But it's great.
I don't want that relationship to romanticized. Like, I want that to be just a lovely platonic friendship between these two sort of adventurers and intrepid adventurers in a really hard, difficult world.
Yeah, but you got to think of it as well, like relationships are forged in this kind of way, aren't they?
And it's a story about adolescence, isn't it?
Yes, and there's what I will say without getting too much into it. The age gap is like a plot point. Like, it's
because he's
like
10 and she's like 13, 14.
I mean, he's 100.
Well, yeah. Oh, this is some Edward Cullen shit, isn't it?
Exactly.
Oh, no. Aang's a nonce.
I think it'd be the other way around, technically. Oh, well, yeah, if he's 100. Yeah, exactly. Come on, mate. I've caught up now.
Stay with me.
Yeah. But yeah, they actually do address, I think, in a very balanced, fair
way.
Like, they do get that across the plot point without giving anything away.
Okay.
But yeah, I found...
Okay.
But generally, yeah, I thought the art was it was good in these areas, and everything else it was serviceable, but in a positive way. And it's hard to fuck up when they're not just like doing. It's not like Star Wars where you've got like live action models to go by.
Yeah.
They had animation models to go by.
Yeah, totally. And and they would have had a trove of reference illustrations of all the characters to go on. However, I do think this in itself is noteworthy because remember when we read the Rick and Morty comics?
Yeah, that felt very weird.
Well, yeah, because the people who were drawing it didn't do as good a job of translating what was happening in the animation to what was happening in the comic book. And obviously, do you know how animation works?
I mean, very vaguely.
So you will draw reference frames, right? And your reference frames will be the keyframes. And so, say you're throwing a punch, your two keyframes will be the point where your fist is still in your guard, and then the point where the punch has landed. And then you draw transitional frames in between them.
Yeah.
So you plot out all your reference frames, which would be the panels in your comic book, and then you put transitional frames in between them to get the movement right. Because there's no point in drawing movement if you don't know where that movement's going to start and finish, right? So that's how most animators will work. It's different for every animator, but that's the general rule of thumb as to how animation works these days. And so what they've done here is really nailed all of the reference frames. They're using those core reference frames of like, this is what it would look like before and after this thing has happened to get that across. But whomever has done this has done a really good job of making this feel like the cartoon. It felt like I was watching episodes of the cartoon, to the extent that if I were to just watch the cartoon and read this for pleasure, in a year or 6 months' time, I wouldn't be able to tell you what was from the comic and what was from the cartoon. It would all just blur into one.
Yeah. And one thing with regards to credit, like one thing I should get across is, while this was basically overseen by the creators of the original animation, these specific anthologies were done by a bunch of people. There's like 20 names, people who like wrote a bit and animate or illustrated a bit or whatever. You can tell, as I said, most of the illustration is like very close to the original cartoon, but there are a couple of stories later on in book 2 where you can see the animation is slightly different.
Or the illustration.
Sorry, illustration within the comic, yeah. It's slightly different. It's still like core, like, models and stuff, but you can tell it's a little different. There is also one particular one I liked where there's a story about Momo, the monkey character, who that one is illustrated all in like a single color. It's all like in yellow, and it's meant to be like from his perspective kind of thing. But otherwise, yeah, the art was pretty much standard as you could get for like just a direct adaptation done by the people who did the original animation.
But it looks good.
Yes.
And again, like there was every opportunity for it not to look good.
Yes.
Things don't always, things only look good because they're done well. And I just want to really highlight that it was done really well.
Yes. Good execution.
Yeah.
With regards to the story, as I said, the story it's anthology stories of various lengths, which I think is the most important thing to kind of discern. Some of these are, as you pointed out earlier, a cut like 2 pages maybe of just like a thing happens, the characters react, and then it's resolved, or a humorous ending, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the bees.
Yeah, and those little stories, I think they're really good for just kind of giving you a bit more of the characters that you already developed affection for from the animation. Like for me, I've not taken any of this in for years since I finished Legend of Korra, and I was then kind of done because that was all that was out.
Yeah,
I never bothered with the film. But
you wouldn't, would you?
No, exactly. But now it feels like reuniting with old friends. Like even just a short thing about like, there's some scorpion bees, and Aang thinks if he's just calm and he's fine, and then he gets covered in them, and then he's running away from them, and then they end up on some Fire Nation soldiers.
And then there's more serious stories that happen. But this reminded me of, and we've talked about them before, the Simpsons comics.
Yeah, like that.
Because, The Simpsons often, I mean, the stakes weren't as high in The Simpsons, but, it was like, as far as domestic stuff goes, the stakes were pretty high. Often, like, Marge nearly had an affair and Homer lost his job a bunch of times. And, these things are happening. And then you're getting these little anthology stories set in that world. It really reminded me of that.
Yeah. There was some longer stories, though, which then got more into the close-up story, like the main story of the
and like
animation.
issue 3, when they were in the Fire World, and we started seeing stories that weren't centered around the main characters.
Yeah.
Like there was a guy who wanted to take this girl out, and so he like took her to a noodle place, and they're just like having a date. Remember that one?
Yeah, what, the episode in the animated series?
No, there was a bit about it in the comic book.
I didn't read that far because I only read up to the point where you had Well, I thought you had got to in the TV show.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
Also, that is an episode in the TV show.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's related or not having read that part of the comic.
Right, okay.
One thing I forgot to mention earlier, we were talking about the TV show. How do you find the character Uncle Iroh?
Uncle Iroh.
He's like one of the most beloved characters of anything.
Which one's Uncle Iroh?
He's the uncle to Zuko.
The Firebender?
Yes.
Yeah, I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
I thought you would.
Yeah, I mean, they're introducing some Zen stuff with him, aren't they? He's kind of like there's some Buddhist undertones to him and his characterization and the things he says and does.
Yeah.
Because that first meeting we had with him, where he's training Zuko on the ship.
Yeah.
And we meet Zuko and we find out he's kind of, he's like the son of a great general or whatever, and he's trying to live up to this legacy, and he's not really there yet, and he's so fiery and feisty. I thought he really grounded the Fire people and made them kind of almost relatable in a way.
He kind of gets across that even though the Fire Nation as a whole are the aggressors in the story, because it's still a nation, it's a collection of people, and not everyone in there is as bad as the worst people who are the antagonists.
Yeah, it gets across that they're a diaspora of individuals.
Yes, and that gets more closely looked at in season 3 when they are in the Fire Nation.
Yes.
So then they're interacting with the people. So imagine like being in amongst the people who are, I mean, we as British people, like the people who are colonizing the rest of the world, but we're just like at home, not really worried about it.
Do you think they are a metaphor for us?
I think a little bit. I think there's a little bit of a sneaky reference there.
Yeah, I get it.
Whereas if we were the Firebenders, we'd just be using it to heat our tea. Essentially.
And I suppose it's interesting the idea that because Aang has to go and learn firebending from somebody. Like he has to find somebody to teach him firebending, doesn't he?
Yes.
Like, he's never going to really be the Avatar until he's learned all 3 or 4, right?
Yep, all 4 total.
And so it makes sense, and I'm quite excited for that series. I wish I'd gotten to it before this recording, but life.
Well, this is why we'll do another bit like later on, and then we can do the continuing stories, and we can get more in depth. The whole episode will be more devoted to the actual comics that continue the story, which I'm super excited for. Just continuing a great story by the same people, like Jesus Christ. But yeah, with regards to these stories again, I thought there was really good little funny parts. Like if you like the characters, it's more than just like kids humor.
Yes.
Like one panel specifically, I thought was like really the comedic timing of comic book panels is an interesting thing now that we've seen a bit, or like attempts of it. And I thought this did really good. One where there's a story where they're in a town and these kids are throwing water bombs, like water balloons, but it's not balloons, but it's like how they make
Is
them.
this the one where Katara says don't get in a water fight with a waterbender, and then there's somebody about to throw a water bomb at her?
Sokka is just in the background. So the way your eye draws in that panel, it naturally draws first to Katara, who's like front and center.
Yeah, she's in the foreground and speaking.
And your eyes go to her first, you read her speech bubble, and then you look in the background, and there's just Sokka in the background ready to lob one right at her.
Yeah, totally.
And I was like, for such a simple like kid-like joke, I thought it was so well laid out.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good joke.
Yeah, and just the concept itself, but just how in one panel it got across like, here's the end, and here's a little funny bit at the end. And I laughed by myself while reading it, which is
I
like,
chuckled at that too.
Yeah, which is like peak for like, if you're by yourself taking in any kind of content and you physically laugh, like it must be good.
Yeah.
But yeah, little bits like that I thought were real credits to the story. And then at that point, soon after that was a story about the Airbenders.
Yeah.
So I assume in the season 1 you've seen like what's happened to the Airbenders.
Well, so we've seen the Airbender temple that Aang is from, kind of desolate and abandoned,
and that's where he first hits the Avatar state or something.
Yes. Yeah. And then we've seen another Airbender temple that's been taken over by a bunch of people who've learned how to build planes, basically. So they're on these gliders, and there's a lad in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
There's a lad in a wheelchair who's like
in the noughties,
right?
Yeah.
Like positive representations of disabled people in the noughties, man. That's fucking wild.
Yeah. I think that story, like again, represented in this smaller story, but it basically calls back to that subplot in the animated show.
Yeah.
The feeling of him being the last of his kind and all that, and like the fact that he ran away from it. So there's also that guilt of like, maybe if he had stayed, he could have saved his people and that. So again, really lofty
totally.
story for a kids cartoon, essentially. But I thought this was a good one where it turns out like he finds a thing in a marketplace. He's like, this is an airbender thing. Where did you get it? And the guy's like, oh, someone sold it to me from up the mountain. So he goes up the mountain, literally leaves Sokka and Katara to be like, they will just say there's no point checking it out, or he didn't want to get them involved kind of thing. He didn't want to see, he didn't want them to see him raising his hopes.
Yeah.
Because it was probably not going to pan out. Then it turning out to be a trap. Not only a trap by the Fire Nation, not just for him specifically, but the reveal that they used that to get the stragglers of airbenders after like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought that was like a deep fucking cut.
It's really dark,
story.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And what it gets light again when the twist in the little twist in the story is that Aang is like, well, you've trapped me in a room full of airbender stuff and I'm going to use that. So he uses air powers and he escapes and he uses the things in the rooms to like disorient and defeat the fire soldiers, essentially.
Yeah.
What made me have a weird feeling was I thought, did none of the other previous airbenders, like, were they not able to do that as well? Like, it wasn't quite an Avatar thing, was it?
It
was
implies that they were overpowered, doesn't it?
Yeah. And part of me did I had to headcanon it a little bit, and I did think maybe, like, it's been 100 years, so they're not doing it the same way that, like, the people 100 years... Well, is it 100 years? Yeah, it must have been 100 years.
Well, I mean, he disappeared 100 years ago. This could have happened at any point in between those 2 points. It's never made clear, is it?
That is true, yeah. But the idea that the others couldn't get out, but they were probably more like held down and restrained, whereas with Aang, there's like he's the Avatar, but he's a kid. Like we'll be fine, and then underestimating him. That's my headcanon, at least.
If you could have any one of the 4 powers, if you could be a waterbender, airbender, earthbender, or firebender, which one would you pick and why? This isn't Ryan in the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender. This is, I have the ability to bequeath one of the powers into you right now, and you just get to go out and exist with one of the 4 powers. Which one would you pick?
Are we talking I'm assuming we're just talking the base powers and not the evolutions of them that happen.
Well, I think you can reason it out that you would be able to, pick one that you think you could develop into doing other things. Like if you think that firebending would be more useful to you than just firebending, that can be your reason for picking it.
Well, the reason I ask is, again, there's the evolution. So fire turns into lightning bending. Earth turns into metal bending, which in this day and age would be, well, you're basically Magneto at that point.
I think we include the level ups.
Yeah.
We include the higher level feats.
Yeah, I'd have to go earth bending then. But
why?
Because then the metal bending, which obviously huge. In this day and age, like we are normally in and around Earth, so there's always Earth to call upon, especially metal if you get to that stage as well.
I mean, there's still plenty of water about for now.
Yeah. If you're near water, then you're going to be laughing. Like, I just think it's not necessarily even just what's about more, it's just like what you do with it as well. And I feel
what would you do with it?
Well, in the sense that if you were like pushed to defend yourself or something, because you're the only magic person in this modern world, so they'd be like, get that guy who's got magic powers so we can militarize
don't know that
them.
you're necessarily the only one.
Okay.
So if you're getting these powers, other people might be. So let's just assume there's some other benders floating about.
But even though there'd still be if a small enough amount that people would be like, we need to capture some and test them and make weapons out of them. Or drop nukes on them, however the government would react.
I think there's a fun irony in the fact that because earthbending gives you metal powers, it means that the earthbenders would have power over Bender.
Yep.
Futurama.
You're like, kiss my metal ass, and then just get crumpled up into like a cube or something.
Yeah, Toph just cubes him. So, so you'd pick earthbending.
I think so.
What would you do with it? What would you use it for?
Well, at that point, then you're getting into. You know me, like I'm probably going to go the superhero route. Like that's my whole basis of like fandom. So that's probably one thing I'm going to jump to.
I think I would just take waterbending and become a really good plumber.
Yeah. Stop the water without having to do the stopcock.
Yeah, totally. Like somebody's got a big leak and they're like, we could call the normal plumber.
Yeah.
And he'll be like £100 an hour and he'll find the stopcock and turn it off and fix the pipe. Or we could get that weird dude from Norfolk who will just, by some weird magic, move all of the water out of our house. And then just like, have a little dalliance. And
finding a leak, you just aim your hand at the pipes and you just sense like it's coming out there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Like, do you know about wayfinding?
I've heard the term.
So wayfinding is this weird magic thing where people can find water right? Like they use 2 sticks and a fucking coin on a string, and they use it to find water. And I read a book about witchcraft and magic, and a wayfinder who they interviewed for it said oil companies hire me to find oil, and they pay me and I find the oil. None of them will ever admit to it because it's mental. But allegedly, oil companies still use wayfinders, like actual witches, to like look for oil because they can find liquids underground. And so I like the idea that I could just like, as a waterbender, I could just, go work for Esso.
Yeah.
Go work for BP finding oil.
I mean, if there's water in it, then I guess that counts.
Yeah, totally. I also like the idea that you could just like, because humans are more made out of water than they are earth or fire. And so I feel like if you were superheroing, being able to manipulate the water in a human body would be pretty dope.
Well, I was just about to actually say a little bit that comes into season 3, I believe. And I'm only going to say the barest amount. There does come a thing where, as you've correctly posited, the next evolution of like waterbending gets into a thing called bloodbending.
Oh.
And that's all I'm going to say. But they do a really, really good job of incorporating it into the story. Yeah. It's as dark as it sounds.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah. So back to the comic. At the end of that story we were talking about, the one with the Aang getting tricked into the airbender ruins and getting caught and whatever, I did think it was a really poignant last line of that comic where Katara says something about something like, oh yeah, I guess the airbenders would have loved this area and would have come over or something, would have come to this area, would have been drawn to this area. And Aang just goes, like, really solemnly, like, yeah, a few of them probably were. And just that,
wow.
I thought was so good.
Yeah.
And again, it must be credit to the writing of the original animated series, but just saying a lot with a little, like, and really simplified dialogue, but just really economic use of words to get across, like, big, like, again, lofty meanings and stuff. And I think the dialogue, looking at this, like, the dialogue is essentially from the show, so I'm not going to credit like this adaptation specifically.
We have to. You have to credit this adaptation.
Yeah, it's the same people, so they are carrying over the same style of dialogue.
Yeah, they wrote a good thing.
Yeah,
like it doesn't matter that they'd also written another better, well, not better, but another good thing before that.
And
we've read so many comics by people who have written really good things and then written trash.
Yes, and for being simplified, like for kids to understand kind of dialogue, I found it less cliched and over expositional than a lot of superhero comics. And I fully say that as a fan, like,
fully.
These people are doing better with less dialogue than some comic book writers.
Again, I mean, I think partly that is attributable to the fact that they had a really well worked out universe that they're operating within.
But even just explaining it in simple lines of dialogue, and still making the characters like fun and engaging, but and being able to just get across like realistic, if like even in this kind of fantasy world, it feels realistic, like in a kids show level, but still like real. No one's talking like in ways you wouldn't do. You know what I mean?
It's very grounded, is the word I'd use for it.
And that I'm just like carrying on from the animation, but still worth crediting at the very least here.
Yeah, 100%. It's yeah, I mean, from what I read of it, it seemed very grounded. It seemed really well put together. Aang's dialogue has always been fun because it's hearing the occasional very wise thing come out of a child's mouth.
Yeah, I mean, and he's a weird character for that because he is a child.
Yeah,
and even though he's 100, he's only lived for 10 years essentially.
Yes,
but even in that 10 years, he still had this big he was confirmed as the Avatar immediately, and in that 10 years was already being trained for these grander goals and purpose and all that.
Yeah,
kind
of
stuff.
And he was being raised in a monastery, wasn't he? And the way he looks is really reminiscent of Shaolin.
And that really speaks to the nomadic tribes of the air people. Like they embodied the element that they bent by being people they're so loose to the wind and never in one place. And even though they had monasteries and stuff, and
when we see the flashbacks of him in the monastery as a child, and you see the masters, and this guy's he's baked all these cakes, and you're trying to work out what he's doing with the cakes and what he needs Aang for, and really he's just throwing them off the roof at the other masters.
Yeah,
and it's they're silly, but a lot of that Zen philosophy was about a lot of them were a bit mad and a bit silly, is the point. A lot of these old Zen masters had some of that. And so again, it does a really quite apt job of teaching you some stuff about Far Eastern culture in a roundabout kind of weird way, because this is an American production, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, definitely all American.
And so it's sort of, ancient Chinese culture, once abstracted because it's fantasy, but also viewed through the eyes of American writers. And I think that in and of itself is fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's a unique take from what it's influenced by and who it was made by, and again, just like lightning in a bottle, like how well it came out, like the execution.
Yeah.
To the point where people are still trying to adapt it and not failing. I'm not going to say that with the Netflix one, but like missing the mark a little bit. Well, I said to you, there was the guy who put it best for me was a YouTuber called Man Carrying Things. And all his videos are like less than a minute, like they're less than a minute sketches. But he did one for this, which was basically the two reactions to the Netflix show.
Yeah, you told me about this.
Yeah, one was like, I'm telling the listeners, I know. One was like, that was terrible, like, and the other one was like, nah, that was really good. It's like really deep, and the dialogue was great, and it was really paced well. And the other was like, yeah, but they didn't do this, and they could have done this better, and blah. And and then the other was like, well, I guess it's not as good as the animated show. And then the one who liked it's like, what animated show? It's like, oh, that explains it. So
totally.
If you didn't see the animated show originally, it seems like a good show. But if you're comparing it to, again, one of the best TV shows of all time, it's naturally going to fall short.
It's the same way I always used to feel when Game of Thrones was huge. And people were talking about Game of Thrones to me, and I had these sort of negative opinions about it. And I was like, yeah, because it's not as good as the books. And they were like, oh, I've not read the books. And I was like, well, there you go. That's why... That's the chasm over which we're shouting these two opinions. My
issue with that concept is knowing a fan of the books while the TV show is coming out. Yeah. All I would hear is, the show's kind of boring because they're just doing what happened in the books.
For the first couple of seasons, yeah.
But then, when they then changed a couple of things, this friend who was a book reader was like, they changed it and they made it worse than it was book. So I was like, you're not going to be happy either way. Like, you are complaining, but again, this is why I'm not too harsh on the negativity towards
Is this the friend
show.
That we both know that we saw on Friday?
Yes. Yeah. But this is why I'm not quick to judge the people who are judging the adaptation because they're comparing it to the old thing. Because, it's hard to judge something objectively when it is an adaptation.
Yeah, totally.
In terms of funny stuff, the only other bit I want to mention is the story with the bear.
Yeah.
And teaching the bear. I liked the translation of bear to human and the explanation of it. I actually forgot who that character was. I actually had to recap like the entire show because again, it's been years since I've watched it. And unfortunately for me, the best recap I could find was like 20 minutes recapping the main plot of all 3 seasons.
I wish I'd watched that.
it was written really well. No, because you still need to watch the show without spoilers. Like you need to enjoy it in that way.
Right, okay.
But the way he told it, like they'd written it in a way where they were like succinctly telling the plot.
Yeah.
But the way the guy narrated it, and I don't want to call the YouTuber who did it because it was helpful to me, but he's in the corner of it, and the way he's narrating is like, and then Aang and Katara and Sokka get caught in and then the fire soldiers show up, and oh no, but then they get out and they save the day, and I'm like that the whole time, and I'm literally listening.
Are you just annoyed because he's American?
I'm listening to it because I'm like, I have to listen to this because again, it's the quickest,
it's the only
succinctest recap, but I have to listen to this guy talk like this. Like,
should we make a competing recap and put it on the
But it's just me talking like, and then Aang and Katara went to the and then they went the.
Which of your many voiceover voices would you use for it?
I mean, there's the bulk standard one is like the basic commercial one.
Go on.
So, I mean, without anything to read off, I'll go off the Wikipedia. I'll use the Wikipedia.
Can you? I suppose you can't improvise on your voiceover voice, can you?
Well, it's more just like what to read from. Like, I think I just give a bad. If I just go by the Avatar thing.
If we are now, Ryan, in pre-production for a recap of the Avatar Last Airbender series, all 3 seasons. We're going to put it up on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I'm going to write the script. What voice are you going to use to read my script?
So this would be the basic going off this. I'd go, a century ago, young Avatar Aang, afraid of his new responsibilities, fled from his home and was forced into the ocean by a storm. He encased himself and his sky bison Appa in suspended animation in an iceberg near the South Pole. That's what I do.
All that needs is some like upbeat ukulele corporate core. Do you know what corporate core is?
Yeah, but for the listeners.
Corporate core, you know, like when you go to a new job. I'm hoping all our listeners are mature enough to like have jobs and shit.
I've looked at the age range. It's almost certain.
It's almost certainly men in their 30s and 40s, isn't it?
Yes.
And they get you to do these training videos, and it's like e-learning. And then one of them's a video, and it's got like upbeat ukulele music and somebody going, so the interesting thing about insurance...
Oh yeah, I've got samples with like literally like that. I've got demo reels.
So
exactly
it's
that.
like that voice, corporate core.
So if you wanted a little more that corporate core, I would do the voice more like, a century ago, young Avatar Aang, afraid of his new responsibilities, fled from his home and was forced into the ocean by a storm. He encased himself and his sky bison Appa in suspended animation in an iceberg near the South Pole. That's a little more. It's a little more up and down.
It's a bit uncanny valley for me because I'm so familiar with your voice because we do this together.
Do I sound like an AI?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, it's just because it's recognizably your voice, but also not. And bear in mind, Ryan, I don't want to out you to the listeners, right?
Am I going to have to cut this bit out?
You are, yeah. But I really want it to stay in because it's important that they know this about you.
Okay.
Ryan's voice has sounded almost exactly like this since he was about 13.
I'm fine with that now, yeah.
Like your voice broke young and it broke hard.
So there's for the listener, for a little bit of behind the scenes, back when we were like 13, that was when kids started getting phones. So they weren't smartphones with the screen, but they were like not even that, they were like Bluetooth phones and that kind of stuff. And they had Snake and maybe some other games. One up from like the Nokia 3310, but like that kind of mid-range.
Like that great era of mobile phone design where every company was making a vastly different product.
Yeah, and also
Samsung made slidey phones, but Motorola were obsessed with the flip
phones.
Exactly, yeah.
And that was the point where we had just jumped from monolithic and polythic music to actual MP3s.
Monophonic and polyphonic.
Yes. You could put actual MP3s on your phone. Didn't have barely any space for them, but you could have them on. So around that time, you also had the voice recorder. So I remember years after high school, me and my friends found like voice recordings that we'd made.
Yes.
And one of them was literally us at 13, and you hear everyone else in the group, and it's literally like Alvin and the Chipmunks. Like
I've heard this recording.
And then you just hear me going, it's like, how we do this? And it's me going like, oh yeah, we definitely do that, yeah. That was 13.
Yeah. But no. And so, yeah, hearing you, I mean, we have to make it now.
What, the recap of that?
Well, if there's only one on YouTube and it's not very good, we should probably just fill that gap, fill that market.
I mean, let's worry about comic book stuff first, because that's the niche we've carved out first.
Have we already carved it out, though?
There's already comic book explainer videos, which just...
Or have I been rebelling against it since day dot?
Well, like I said, you're reluctant.
Yeah,
but I'm dragging you,
I am, aren't I?
Dragging you by the scruff, like whether you like it or not. So I think that's basically like we've got into a bit about, again, these are anthology stories. There's not as much in the kind of meat of the stories, but the vibe of them I think is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of the animation.
So I suppose I've not really given my take on them yet. So I'm gonna do that now.
Right.
At the end. I'm gonna recap the episode for us, Ryan.
Sure. Jamie's final thoughts.
Oh, can you do that in your best voiceover voice for me?
What, in corporate or?
Yeah, corporate.
Okay. Jamie's final thoughts.
Is there something else other than corporate? You know how you've been asked to do like some of the weird, like almost that when you get celebrities to read things.
Yeah.
And you had to do one for like someone's birthday or something, didn't you?
Yeah, someone had, like they put a load of memes in it, like memes of the day.
Which voice did you use for that one?
They specifically wanted very British.
Right,
so they'd be like, Jamie's final thoughts.
That's my favorite. That's the one. That's the one we're using. I think as adaptations go, this one really has a place because it's not a direct adaptation from the source material, but it's not abstracted from the source material enough that it doesn't have a place. So because we're seeing stories that fill in the blanks of some of the things they happen during their adventures, it feels really timely, feels really well rooted in the story. The illustration's fantastic. The artwork's great. It's laid out beautifully. Really accessible for younger people in your life, I think. Like if say you are one of our 30 to 40 like one of our...
Let's say 20 to 40,
Yeah,
I'd say.
if you're one of our 20 to 40 listeners and there is a small person in your life that's asking you for juice boxes and donuts while you're trying to listen to this episode, you should probably get them a copy of this comic book.
Or show them the original animation. Show them the original animation first, because I think that's a good hook to start.
Yeah.
And then once they inevitably love the original animation, because it looks pretty timeless as well, like the actual cartoon. Once they've seen that, then you go, hey, you know that show you like? Here's some comics of the same character. They're going to go, yeah! And
I think for all the parents who, I mean, I assume there must be some parents who listen to us. If you're looking for something that you can sit down and watch with your kid, that's like a good move on from, say, Bluey.
Yeah.
This would
next level.
You've got a kid who's like not quite into Bluey anymore, and they're making you watch Hot Garbage. This is a really good show to put them in front of.
This is the same kind of tier, I would say, as Gravity Falls and Steven Universe. Like that kind of level.
Oh my God. And do you know what? Steven Universe is on a high pedestal for me. I think it's fantastic.
You know what? In response to this, like in response to having done something that I was originally a fan of, there's probably some Steven Universe comics.
Yeah, but I don't... See, the thing is, Steven Universe is... The lore of Steven Universe is as rich or richer than this. And so I think for us to do a good job of it, you would need to watch a lot of Steven Universe. Because that story really progresses. And then there's this later season they do of Steven as a teenager. There's a feature film that they made. Like Rebecca Black, who made Steven Universe, went to fucking town on it, mate. She did a really good job. I don't know if I necessarily want to subject you to that much Steven Universe, because I don't know how much you'll like it.
I mean, I'm willing to try it. Like, it sounds interesting. So it's one that we should definitely do at some point down the line.
I think, and the thing with Steven Universe is in the early seasons, less of the wider story gets woven into it than this. Like, at the start, it really does feel like an anthology in a lot of ways. There's a lot of, like, short, self-contained stories. Whereas this, it's, like, straight into it, isn't it? But no, I would highly recommend the TV show. And I know nobody needs my recommendation for Avatar: The Last Airbender. As you've already established, it's really fucking popular. But if you even have a passing interest in it, I think the comic books would be a fun place to start. Like they hold up. I mean, even me, who didn't really know anything about the time they spent in the Fire Nation. Yeah. Skimming through the third issue of this that's set there, I got a sense of what was happening and I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And in terms of another character I was going to bring up, which I forgot to earlier, what do you think of the character Boomy? He's the Earth King, or he's like King of the Earth.
Yeah, he's cool.
That's a great little story with the reveal of how he knows Aang and all that stuff. I thought was quite nice. Yeah, that's you've succinctly summarized every other aspect.
Yeah.
The only one I will say is, again, along the similar lines, is if you like the animation, you'll like these comics, because at the end of the day, made by the same people, and those people make great stuff because they have been, and so they're just continuing the trend. I'm really looking forward to doing the Adventure Continues, which is literally from the end of the animation onwards, and that actually, much in a Star Wars way, fills in the gap between Avatar: Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, which takes place like 100 years later, I think.
So what is Legend of Korra?
So Legend of Korra, she is the next Avatar.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay, that's really cool. That's really rad. Oh, but Aang dies.
I mean, I won't say.
And so, in the rotation of things, the next Avatar was going to come from the Fire Nation, weren't they?
No, previous one was Fire Nation.
So who was the next one going to be?
Water Nation.
Dope, they get an Avatar.
Yep.
That's super cool. I mean, I suppose they had one a few generations back, didn't they? But
yeah,
I feel like the Water Nation get the worst run of it.
I mean, in this particular one, yes. I mean, no, the Airbenders. The Air Nation gets the
I
worst.
Suppose, the Air Nation. Their diaspora does get fucked a little bit, doesn't it?
But yeah, so that's basically it. And in terms of next week...
So, begrudgingly... No, actually, I'm not as reluctant. We're going to be talking about Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. And Ryan has a real shit-eating grin on his face right now, because guess who it was written by?
Well, there's one that came out late last year. It's got 6 issues, and it just so happens to be written by Tom King.
I wonder why you wanted to do that.
One of the best comic book writers of all time, is all I'm saying.
Didn't we read something by Tom King that we didn't particularly like recently?
I did. I read Danger Street by him, which, it wasn't as good. He got just kind of a swing and a miss. Like,
big swing and a miss.
Very... lofty aspirations for a title, and he just doesn't quite get it in the execution.
Have you read this Wonder Woman comic?
No, not at all.
You don't know either?
No, not at all.
Exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. And we haven't done any Wonder Woman at all, like not even close, so be interesting in that regard.
Totally. So come back next Monday for Wonder Woman.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. I've been keeping an eye on the shorts that we upload on YouTube, and I don't know if it's you guys or just people that are finding them, but people are having wonderful conversations about comic books underneath our videos, and it just brings so much joy to my heart every time I open one of our videos. And not only have I seen that some people have watched them, but also I'm seeing that, these tiny little snippets of what happens here on the podcast is driving conversation on the internet about comic books.
People are having back and forths.
Yeah,
which is great to see.
People are having actual conversations, and they're picking up on holes in our knowledge in a beautiful way, and we're learning stuff. So if you do listen to the comment, even if this is your first podcast, or you listen every week, I don't know, but go have a look at our YouTube shorts. It's a 30-second memory of a time that you got to spend with us, and you can tell us we're idiots on the internet publicly.
I'd say the comments have been great. They have not compared as of yet to the just singular gay. Still a top-tier comment. Like, it's going to be hard to beat. And as I always say, it's great that the algorithm is finally paying our videos the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, I've told you so many times that you're not allowed to say that on the podcast, Ryan.
All I'm saying, I'm just remarking, just calmly as anything. Just saying that it's about time that the algorithmic tendencies of YouTube is finally decided to pay our videos the respect that it deserves. Yeah.
Ryan, we deserve no respect, but it would be really lovely if whoever you are listening to us drone on at the end of this.
You guys already pay us respect, so
you guys are fantastic. We love you. We haven't found a name for you yet, but if you are one of our regular listeners and you'd like to submit a name for what we call you guys when we talk about you on the podcast, please do, because we're stumped.
I've got an idea, but I don't know if I want to put it out there in case it influences it.
Yeah,
but
can you tell me off air? Can you tell me now, and then I can?
I'll tell you.
We can cut it out and then get my response to it. Okay. I thought that was what you were going to say, and I nearly recommended it myself, and I love it. So let's just hope one of them.
Let's see if it develops organically.
Let's hope that somebody is literate enough to think of it.
Not to push you in any one direction. No. That's some Darren Brown level mentalism. You might have missed that I said a word earlier, and I think that word got in your head and made you say this.
And now you're, for some reason, robbing a convenience store. That was one of them, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Or he thought he was a zombie apocalypse or whatever.
Oh, mate, that dude's done some weird shit. Do you know he made a girl from our school drink vinegar once?
I didn't know that, but fair enough.
Yeah, wild.
Cool.
So thank you so much for listening, and good night.
Thank you, goodbye.